On a wet and stormy night in December of 1952, I found myself at a country station some miles and a half away from my Sussex home. The train from London had arrived late. The bus had gone and no taxis were available. The rain was heavy and incessant. The time was 5:55 p.m. and I was expecting an important trunk call from overseas at 6 p.m. at home. The situation seemed desperate. To make matters worse, the station call box was out of order, and some trouble on the line made access to the railway telephone impossible. In despair, I sat down in the waiting room, and having nothing better to do, I compared my watch with the station clock. Allowing for the fact that this is always kept 2 minutes in advance, I was able to confirm the fact that the exact time was 5:57 p.m., 3 minutes to 0 hour. What happened next, I cannot say. When I came to myself, I was standing in my hall at home. A good 20 minutes walk away, the clock was striking 6. My telephone call duly came through a few minutes later. Having finished my call, I awoke to the realization that something very strange had happened. Then, much to my surprise, I found that my shoes were dry and free from mud, and my clothes showed no sign of damp or damage. To modern ears, such stories sound absolutely absurd, but they're a part of a long-standing tradition where such miracles can and often happen. Religions are filled with stories of teleportation, especially in tales surrounding Christian saints. Sometimes they reappear somewhere else or in two places at once, a phenomenon known as bilocation. Bilocation is closely related to the phenomenon of doppelgangers, where exact replicas of a person are seen by others, or in cases predicting the person's death, by their owners. Going back to the first story, wouldn't it be nice to simply just snap your finger? Oh, crap. Hold on a second, guys. I can fix this. Cool. There we go. I'm back. This does sound like science fiction, but some stories do seem to suggest that there might actually be power in teleportation, wherein people or objects appear instantaneously. I'm not going to snap my fingers again for the sake of me disappearing, and they might reappear somewhere else. This just might be a genuine phenomenon, and I'm going to show you some real life examples. Take, for example, the Mary Jesus of Agreda. Officially, she never left her convent in Spain. However, there are reputable reports, more than 500 in fact, of her appearing in America between 1620 and 1631, where she had ministered to Humano Indians in what is today called New Mexico. Now, these stories came not only from the indigenous population, but also from missionaries that the church had dispatched to the American Southwest. In fact, in 1622, Father Alonso de Benavides wrote both the Pope and the King of Spain demanding to know why the Humano already knew of Christianity before his arrival. It seems as though Father Alonso might have felt undermined by the arrival of another missionary without his prior knowledge. The Humano told Father Alonso that they had learned about the religion from a European nun they called the Lady in Blue, who actually left them physical artifacts of her presence in the form of a chalice, crosses, and rosaries. The chalice was later examined and believed to have come from Mary Jesus' convent. To make the nun's case even more compelling, Father Alonso was granted permission to examine her and discover that her account conformed exactly to the letter with what he had heard all the way to the other side of the world. She even accurately described their customs and their appearance with startling accuracy. Now, teleportations are not always pleasant affairs. Sometimes they occur involuntarily. Oh crap, I did it again. I need to stop doing that. An argument can be made that ancient accounts of being kidnapped by the fairies or modern stories of alien abduction where victims are found miles from where they started might be categorized in this context. Another tale from Spanish culture, often retold as a ghost story, describes a soldier who, in October of 1593, was found wandering Mexico City's main plaza. He seemed confused, as did everyone else. His uniform looked completely unfamiliar to them. Only after talking to him did they discover that he had started his day in the Philippines. As it turned out, his uniform was an exact match for Spanish soldiers stationed over 9,000 3,000 miles away. The soldier explained how he had been on a sentry duty at the governor's palace, located in Manila, before finding himself miraculously transported. It was a tumultuous time, he elaborated, since the governor had recently just been assassinated. All this news to folks in Mexico City. However, when a ship arrived in Mexico months after the soldier's teleportation, the crew confirmed numerous aspects of his story, including the governor's assassination. Now, one of the more famous modern accounts of possible teleportation occurred in 2018, rather recent actually. On February 7th, Konstantinos Danny Flippidis, I believe it said, of Toronto, Canada, mysteriously vanished from a New York resort near Whiteface Mountain. I mean, there was no sign of a major avalanche nor any other explanation for his mysterious disappearance. He had even left behind all of his belongings, including but not limited to his identification and even his vehicle. All combined, the ensuing search party spent nearly 7,000 hours searching for Danny, but he never turned up. Everyone feared the worst, and to their joy and surprise, the Danny placed a phone call to his wife on February 13th, 2018, one day before Valentine's Day. So fellas, if you're out there watching this, just remember, if Danny can remember to call his sweetheart a day before Valentine's Day, well, you don't got any excuses. Somehow, someway, Danny wound up in California, nearly 3,000 miles away. While it's entirely possible to cover this distance in under a week, like a plane will have you there in the same day, Danny was found wearing the same ski gear he wore when he vanished, down to his helmet and goggles. As to how he wound up in California, Danny had no idea, other than that he simply felt dazed and confused. And no, we're not talking about the movie. Danny has no history of mental illness either. The only thing he remembered about his last moments in New York was that he, in his words, went down, and the next thing he knew, he woke up cold and sore. The only thing he can guess is that he flagged down a truck at some point because he vaguely recalls hearing a truck driver mentioning that they were entering Utah. The best explanation that medical officials can offer was that Danny suffered a concussion and entered what's called a fugue state, a poorly understood state of consciousness where victims travel vast distances without the ability to recall or recollect where or why they wandered. Their diagnosis still remains inconclusive, though, in many regards. If Danny did suffer a fugue state, it must represent one of the most dramatic examples. Supposedly, Danny retained one credit card, which he had paid for his expenses during his zombie-like state. That, or he teleported. Now, this is just me personally speaking. Why wouldn't you just look at his purchase history over the last 7 days with that credit card? I mean, wouldn't that kind of prove if he really was transported or not? I don't know. But other examples of teleportation seem to be much more mysterious. In a famous case from Pune, India, a young boy in the early 20th century was actually levitated and transported on more than one occasion. In addition to himself, between 1928 and 1929, researchers recorded hundreds of instances where objects in his direct vicinity moved on their own, including examples where they vanished and reappeared later. It's like we're living in a real-life Unreal Engine 5 here. The Pune case naturally brings us to the topic of teleported objects. We find this phenomenon across a broad spectrum of paranormal interaction, from UFO contact to poltergeist infestations. In fact, one of the hallmarks of poltergeist activity is the sudden disappearance and reappearance of objects referred to in the parapsychological literature as apports or disapports. Teleporting objects might be the most common of all paranormal phenomena. We have all had it happen to us, at least at one point or another. In 1957, for example, researcher Raymond Bayless reported a long-handled paintbrush that simply slipped from his hand, then vanished while speaking with a student in a Los Angeles art studio. There was nothing else in the room except 2 stools and an easel. There wasn't even any carpet, nor was the room dim. It was brightly filled with sunlight to facilitate their painting. Yet, when the paintbrush fell, both Bayless and the student heard it clatter onto the floor, whereupon it simply ceased to exist. Bayliss later concluded that it had just vanished into thin air. I mean, we've all had that happen before. In another example from the early 20th century, a nurse always fastidiously placed her keys on her dining room table the moment she returned home. Well, one day, she was summoned back to work within moments of entering the door. To her surprise, the keys were nowhere to be found. Now, she eventually had a full set made to replace them, but only a few days later, she needed a cork from a medicine bottle and went to where she always kept extras in a tin box in the bottom partition of a trunk in her hallway. There, amidst the spare corks, sat her keys, despite her not opening the box in a very long time, and certainly not the day when her keys disappeared. There might be an actual scientific basis for teleportation though, because in 2017, Chinese scientists announced that they had successfully teleported a particle from the surface of the Earth to a satellite orbiting our very planet. It wasn't much, just a photon, a subatomic particle, but it reappeared on China's Myceus satellite from its starting point in the Gobi Desert over 300 miles below. The actual science behind it is quite confusing, and it's important to note that this did not represent the physical transportation of a photon, but rather the transfer of information from one photon to a second photon in a phenomenon known as quantum teleportation. However, it might as well serve as proof of concept that more sophisticated forms of teleportation, where objects are physically instantaneously transported vast distances, might just be around the corner. A question lingers, however. Is this a scientific breakthrough, or are human beings just now catching up with an older, more dramatic phenomena once known to our mystics, seers, and saints? Could teleportation have been real all along, and we are just now unraveling the mysteries behind one of the fundamental marvels of our own universe? Well, only time will tell. But more importantly, I want to know what you guys think, so be sure to go ahead and let me know what you think down in the comments below. I would love to hear from all of you. Also, if you guys enjoy storytelling of the mysterious and supernatural, be sure to go ahead and smack that like and subscribe button for more content just like this. And as always, guys, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next episode.